Okie dokie, part two. So we're going to just start where we left off last time with all of our little clips. And let's learn how to add effects plugins, automation envelopes, and then do some other tricks like reversing it. The idea of takes in Reaper, exploding a take. And we'll get into kind of the end where you do what's called rendering audio, which is also called bouncing in most other DAWs. So adding effects, we'll focus on these four. So these very general effects plugins that are in pretty much any program that you might use. Most important ones, most common ones that every producer would use a lot would be EQ, also called an equalizer, and with four different types of filters: a low pass or high pass, a low shelf or high shelf, a band filter, or a notch filter. So we'll look at what all those do. Reverb and delay. Reverb being, as we clap, it's that long tail of sound that kind of just hangs, and it creates a nice, beautiful wash. It creates a kind of physical, spatial feeling to the sound. And then delay usually being kind of like echo, where we have an attack, and then another attack, and then kind of fades as it goes away. So it's kind of separate attacks in an echo type of thing, whereas reverb is one hit, and then a kind of a slow, long tail as it fades out. Pitch correction for doing whatever, making yourself sound like a chipmunk. Go for it. So these are kind of four very general things, and we'll look the specific names that we're looking at in Reaper are these things right here. So let's go ahead and just look at it. I'm going to use this foot and sand sound because it's kind of like the longest thing, so I don't have to worry about looping. Okay, so let's say I want to add, let's add like an EQ to start. So I can click on effects, and it's also like down here in effects. So I can just hit that first. And then we see all these things. So probably easiest thing to do, let's just go into categories. And I'm going to look at EQ. This is a separate plugin that I downloaded, but just the standard one that comes with Reaper is this ReEQ. So Kakos is the company that makes Reaper. So let's add that. And then we can see. So this now we see a spectral analysis of our sound from kind of the lower frequencies. So we see 50 hertz, 100 hertz, 200 hertz, all the way up to 20,000 hertz, which is this is basically the range that humans can hear. And by default, we have these four bands, and the type of each can be set. So this one is set to be a low shelf. As you can kind of see as I move it, it creates a kind of shelf of attenuating the sound or boosting the sound. For number 2, you can see by default it is a band. So that's basically just like a little hill, right? So we can boost up a little part. Let's say there's like a little element at a certain frequency. And also with this, just like when I said before about boosting the volume on the fader knobs on the mixer, you want to be careful if you are boosting it up too much, because you can lead to a peaking or clipping if there's too much energy in that spot. So just be aware of that. I mean, this recording is quite quiet, so I think I can get away with a little bit of this. So in our band, so we can see what frequency are we at, and this is actually great. It kind of tells us roughly what the note for that frequency would be. So that's a unique thing that many other EQs don't have. The gain here. So again, we're dealing with decibels. So 0 would be no change. Negative would be attenuating it. And then positive would be boosting it. And then this bandwidth also called Q in some other programs. So just the letter Q, you'll see this on the EQ. So this corresponds to the sharpness of that. So a low bandwidth or low Q value is very sharp. A high value is very broad. So let's say you only want to affect, a very specific frequency band. So you'd have a very low bandwidth value. Okay. So by default, 2 and 3 are set to band, and see 1 is low shelf, 4 is high shelf. I can kind of boost that up or down, but we can change that as we wish. So if I did, let's say if I made this a low pass. So what that means is it is like absolutely cutting off frequencies above the certain threshold. There's a certain slope until it kind of completely gets cut off. Actually, you know what? I can see right now. So when I was doing that little funny business with the number 3 band, taking it all the way up, I peaked for a moment there. So it shows me here I've got plus 0.3 in red. So I went too high. Okay, so back to low pass. So a low pass filter allows the low frequencies to pass, and it cuts things higher than whatever the cutoff is. Again, we have a kind of bandwidth, which changes the kind of resonance or shape of that. So let's say I did, maybe for 1, if I made that into a high pass. So now I'm cutting off all these other frequencies down here. It's all that's left is really the really kind of high, hissing, noisy, some little bird sounds maybe. Let me go back to the beginning. There we go. Okay. And then maybe let's look. So, low shelf, high shelf, band pass, low pass, high pass are the most common ones. We could also see a notch. So this would be kind of in the way that low pass and high pass absolutely remove the frequencies that are above or below it. The notch will pick a one little notch of frequencies and eliminate it completely. So this is useful if you have, I don't know, maybe you make a recording and you can see on the analysis here that there's one little like bump that's kind of some annoying sound, and so this would be how you can get rid of that. Okay. So maybe I'm gonna keep this like this. I'm gonna make a little band here. Okay. So whatever, like every track, this is a really common tool to use. So you might, go through this is kind of talking about data again. I always talk about shaping it like it's clay. So in this sense, we can really, think of the sound like it's clay, and the EQ is kind of shaping the lows and the mids and the highs into just whatever type of sound you want it to be. For reverb, maybe best for reverb to go back to one of these breath sounds. And we'll just loop this one. Turn looping on. Let's do solo. Psst. Psst. So open that up. Categories. Let's just go to reverb. So both of these are by the Reaper team. But let's just look at reverb. And then when we do that, this is like a blank screen. We also need to select an impulse response generation. And so this shows us a few different things. So I want to get a reverb generator. And when we do that, we can see this kind of, this is an IR map or IR generator. So essentially what an impulse response is, if you like imagine like famous buildings, you can go to like famous churches or, you know, big acoustic spaces like a stadium or concert hall, and they have a unique impulse response signature to each space. So it's almost like a fingerprint of a certain architecture. And so what it is, if you imagine that you go into like a big church, clap your hands, and there's a certain way that the sound kind of bounces around all the surfaces and then comes back to that point of the sound event. And so the kind of mathematical journey of all the sound waves as they reflect off of all the surfaces, that creates this impulse response. And so there's, you know, for some people that are really interested in this, they have created like IR files, impulse response files for specific locations. So if you wanted your sound to sound exactly like it's coming from, I don't know, Met Stadium, I don't know, what is it called, City Field, where they play baseball. So you potentially you could find an IR file for Mets City Field. I don't know. I don't know. Probably sounds bad. I don't know. It's like open air, so I wonder how that would sound. But this is just generating one, synthesizing its own IR. So from here we get all these little stats that we can change, little parameters. So we can already hear like it's different. So I'm gonna make it last longer. There we go. Okay. So also stereo width. So by default, the reverb is processed in a stereo field. So you can already see, even though my file is mono to start with, as it's playing, the left and right channels are now a little bit different because the reverb is processing left and right in different ways. I have stereo width like all the way up. If I bring that down, actually no, if I bring that down to like 0, then it kind of maintains, it feels more, the reverb also is like in the center. But if stereo width is like that, now I can kind of hear more, the reverb feels like it's like out here as opposed to in the center. So especially if you have headphones on, you start to get a sense of that spatial design for the sound. Okay. So there's all kinds of things you could play with in here. Okay, I'm cool with that. Delay. Let's do delay on this one, let's say. Okay. Delay. And so this Valhalla is a separate VST plugin that I downloaded, but the redelay is the built-in one. So let's see what happens. Okay, so you can hear, here's where our audio actually is, but we hear another kind of version of this. So I'm just playing around with, you could set the delay time in milliseconds. Right, so even I stopped it, right, because I have feedback up quite a lot. It takes a while to go down. So this would be the number of milliseconds between the actual sound playing in my waveform and then how it repeats. Or we can do musical time. So this is in number of eighth notes. So depending on what you can set the BPM here somewhere. So it's set to BPM 120 and 4/4. So if it's musical time 4 eighth notes, so that essentially is like a half note, right? If I did 2 eighth notes, then that just loops every quarter note. So this would keep the delay repetitions in sync with other musical elements, if you wanted that. So feedback essentially controls like how long that tail is. So if before feedback was 0, it was just one single delay. As you bring feedback up, it's going to create this kind of longer thing. I could also add a little filter. So for every loop of that delay, it's going to get a little bit of a EQ filter on it also. And then we get into a little feedback loop. So if feedback gets up to like close to 0 or above 0, then for every loop of that delay, it's actually growing louder and louder and louder until it kind of gets to the ear shattering point. So also for all of these effects, there's a couple of cool properties also you should know about. I guess one being this bypass right here. So I've got it set. I want to compare, okay, what's the before and after sound? I can just click this. Right, so that bypasses the effects. So this is just the standard sound. Now with. So this is a good way to kind of compare before and after. Also, this idea of wet and dry is a general term in pretty much every single effects plugin. So the dry signal would be just the audio that's coming in, and the wet would be the signal that's being kind of the output of this process. So if I did, actually let's do this, maybe better for reverb, you can kind of hear it. So here we got dry still at 100%, because at 0 decibels, wet is down there. If I bring dry all the way down, and wet up a little bit. So now I'm not hearing the input sound at all. I'm only hearing the kind of processing that the reverb is doing. So just by like mixing the wet and dry together, you get kind of a different feeling. Here with the dry, you really hear that little attack in the beginning more. Without it, it's more of just like a little slide. And, let's do pitch correction. Cool. What one should we do that to? And let's just do it on the same one. So you could add as many different effects as you want to the same thing. So I added delay on this one. Let's add one more. Let's do pitch correction. And so here we can shift it in terms of semitones, like a semitone being the kind of notes on a keyboard. Cents would be, there's 50 cents in one semitone. So there's 12 semitones to an octave, 50 cents for each semitone. So from C to C sharp, there's 50 cents. So if you wanted to shift things just a little bit, right? But let's do a whole octave. Ooh. That's totally like laser sound there, right? So if we did -1. And then formant shifts. This is more about the harmonics. So there's a fundamental tone of the kind of the main frequency that's heard. Formants will be like all these other little harmonics that are above that. And so when you do this pitch shifting, it can sound kind of artificial. Depending on the fundamental frequency, there should be a certain pattern of formants, but this just kind of shifts that in other ways. So, whatever. Okay. I think that's fine. And then again, so here we see wet is all the way up. There's no dry. So if dry is up, now we're hearing the original plus the one that's down an octave. Cool. Okay. I mean, I could start to go crazy here. Let's do one more. Let's do one more pitch correction. And let's do this one low. Oops. So I've got this one going up, and dry is still there. I've got this one going down. So now we kind of hear all three. So I can hear the three different octaves. Okay. Whatever, have fun. So bypassing, reversing. Let's do that. That's fun. So while we're here on this one, we're having fun with the delay and pitch shifting. So let's just reverse this one. I'm going to zoom in more to this. Okay. And let me just bring the loop off so it's a little bit easier to understand. Okay. Let's reverse it. Let's right click. So lots of options here. You can look more at it, but you know, for now, let's just focus on this reverse items as new take. And then what happens, which is kind of cool, it reversed it, but also it created a new take, which I can then select each one. So let's hear the reversed one. That's pretty cool. Okay. And let's say I want to go back to the original. Just select that. Okay, cool. So you can create many different takes, and you'll kind of see that all like on the same track, and you select which take you want. So this is a really kind of handy way just to save space. So it's in general cool, exploding a take to a new track, doing takes. So if we wanted to, let's say, so before with the looping that I was doing, let's do this. You know what, I'm gonna render, and that's fine. We'll just do this. So before I was like looping, and kind of like dragging it like this all the way. What if I wanted to take just this part where the sound is, and loop just that without all this like silence in between? To actually do that, I can like get it right here, but then if I try to loop it, it just kind of sets the trim point. It doesn't actually loop it. So what I need to do is, let's see, I'll just put it right there. I can, how do I want to do that too? Maybe I want to apply, let's render items as new take. So now that I've done that, so this has now become that, but I rendered just this little part. So now if I click here and drag, no, don't do that. Now if I click and drag, oh, beautiful, right? So now it's looping at that part that I rendered and not this whole clip. Cool. And so now maybe, let's just hear what that sounds like. Okay, that's a little bit much, but you know what? Maybe I'm going to get rid of delay. Okay. That's also a little bit too much, but whatever. And I'm going to go back here again. I'm going to do reverse items as new take. Okay, cool. So I explained it in other parts. It says exploding, but I actually render a take to a new track is what I just did. Or render items as a new take was what I was doing. You could also, there's item processing. See, this is like, there's like too many things to do. I'm happy with that for now. I'm okay with that. So render envelopes, super useful. So let's say I want to maybe bring in effects and have them kind of go away, and maybe like the volume I want to kind of come in and out. I could do something like, you know, manually like that. But to add automation, we can basically just draw curves here automatically, and whatever parameter that you want to automate will do that for you. Let's just do, you know what, actually, to be honest, I liked that one a little bit better because that looping situation was just a little bit much. That's cool. So let's say I want to kind of control a little volume envelope there. Trim we haven't talked about. So this is track envelopes / automation. Let's hit that. This gives us, there's like, oh my god, there's like way too much. All I care about right now is volume, so let's just hide all these other effects. It'll show you like all the different effects that are on that channel. Let's just hit volume. And maybe let's do pan also. So by default this is visible arm, great. And so now, so this kind of just exposed volume and pan. I can do a little situation here. You know what? We can do commands and just draw. We can kind of drag things around. We can right click, create new point. Right click, create new point. Hold command. I'll just go back to drawing. So let's just hear what that did. Let's do a little bit more with our delay so we can hear that. Feedback. And I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little reverb also. Usually reverb comes at the end. Okay, cool. So you can see the volume of it is going up and down as I drew it. Let's do the same for panning. I'll just do the kind of drawing thing. So let's say it starts on the right, the next one's going to be left, and then it slowly kind of goes more towards the middle. So that's right here. Now it's here. It's kind of moving around. So any parameter, we can go back. I can just uncheck the visible there. And it kind of goes away. Any parameter can be affected like that. So all of these things here, like the reverb, let's say I want to animate the wet and dry values, click that, and then suddenly it shows up there. You can automate all those things. So you can get a sense for very quickly it becomes like so many options for all of the parameters changing over time. So I'm not going to worry about those right now. So to export, we do this thing called render audio. In most DAWs, this is actually called bouncing. But if we look up into file, renders right here. And there's some other little details we don't need to know about right now. We can just go file, render, and then, so we need to pay attention to the bounds especially. So source we don't really change because master mix, that's what's kind of coming out of our master channel here. But entire project, for this actually we don't want that because we can see the length is 4 minutes and 19 seconds. And that's because this foot in sand file was very, very long. And so I want to keep this soloed, and I just want, let's say, like this section that's maybe 7 or 8 seconds long. So what we do, we've got our little time selection thing up here, and that is how we control which section we want to export to render. So just make sure that starts at the beginning, and then we can drag this wherever we want it to end. So I'll just go, let's say, to 8 seconds. Let me listen to it one more time. Hit W to go to the beginning. Okay, fine. So let's do this, render. Okay, so instead of our entire project, let's do, we could set custom time range. We can just type that in right there. Or we can do time selection. Oops. Time selection. And so we can see that is about 8 seconds, which is what it should be. If I had snapping on, it would have got snapped exactly to 8 seconds, but it's fine for now. Intro to Reaper is fine. Let's see. I'm going to name it something like reverse laser thing 01, and desktop, that's fine. So these default things are fine. So 44,100 hertz sample rate, stereos is definitely what you want. Full speed offline. So this by default is fine. It just means it's going to render the file faster than it takes to actually play it. For more important or more professional applications, like online render would mean if you have a 10-minute audio piece, it's going to take 10 minutes to render it. So it actually just goes through in real time, and it dedicates all of the computational resources to that one sample at that one moment. And so you can get a higher quality render or higher quality bounce doing that. We don't care at this point. That's perfectly fine. All this stuff is fine also. So wave sounds good. These are all these other formats, but really just wave and AIFF would be the best ones. So by default, the bit depth 24-bit. That's more than we need to work with right now. So even if we wanted to edit this file later, 16-bit is fine. I'm just gonna do 16. 24 doesn't hurt too much, but it's just the higher bit depth you have, the bigger the file size is going to be. So if you're just messing around, 16-bit is fine. If you know something is going to be important and you're going to use it in some future sound design or to use it as a sample for something else, 24-bit would be fine. And all that is fine. You don't need to change anything. So let's do this first, and I'm going to look at this normalize thing after we do that. So okay, all good. Render one file. Bada boom, bada bing. Close. All right. And now what I want to do is bring that in again. Went to desktop, huh? So where did you go? Did you not go to the desktop? Okay, found it. It was hiding on the desktop. So I just want to bring this in so we can also just kind of see. I'm going to solo that actually because I want to see the waveform. And I'm going to kind of boost this up a little bit. Okay, so we can see how this looks. It's, it's also, this is very quiet. It's especially quiet in the beginning. There's some nice blips right here. If I play that. Okay, let's do this again, except this time let's look at the normalizing situation. So where was that? Is this one, right? Yeah, okay. So we've got that soloed. Let's do this again. We got our time selection the same. Render. I'll just call this O2. Time selection, all good, all good. And let's look at normalize. So let's do limit. Okay, so this gives us some options. So what normalizing does, or this idea of limiting, is it will take quieter files, and it's going to boost all of it up. And it's really what this brick wall limit, what that would do is it boosts the loudest part up until it gets to be this 0 decibel value. So it doesn't go up, it doesn't like peak, it doesn't like clip beyond that. It kind of pushes everything up. So if everything is quite quiet and there's like one little spike right there, it's going to boost everything up until that spike is at that 0 decibels value. So that's normally in most programs when you see normalize, that's actually what it does. Normalize 2, so this is some other kind of loudness, quantitative loudness units. So this says -24. This is like if you like send this to Spotify or YouTube or something, usually the amount of LUFS is actually like -14. So as a sort of standardized way to know how loud your file is. But I would say we could try each one of these. I'm just gonna do normalize 2. And we'll do just the default LUFS -24, just to not have to play around with it too much. Normalize on. So let's try this again. Let's render. Okay, I'm going to show in Finder. And I'm going to bring that one in also. Okay, here we go. So, okay, here you can look at these two. So this is with normalizing turned on. This is with no normalizing. So you can see just at a glance the this file is much louder. So the idea of doing like normalizing at the end, it's safe, that it's not going to push it so high that you end up getting clipping. You like go into the red. It's gonna like run as algorithm to make sure it's safe to like boost it in whatever the way it's boosting. I mean, I would probably want to go in to kind of like even out the amplitude of this little sample anyway, but I think that looks a lot better. Cool. Okay, that's good for this part.